Hello, Natalia.
Hello, Margot. How are you?
Very good. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So spectacular to see you. I am so excited about this interview. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having any interest in making the time with me.
Are you kidding me? This is like the most epic subject ever. All right, so good. Okay, well, Margot Anand is a world-renowned teacher of Tantra. Her book titles alone, The Art of Sexual Ecstasy, The Art of Sexual Magic, and The Art of Everyday Ecstasy, the 7 Tantric Keys for bringing passion, spirit, and joy into every part of your life, will surely capture your attention. Margot was one of the very first teachers to bring Tantra to the broad public in Europe and America. Margot's signature method is a practice called Sky Dancing Tantra. She maintains institutes worldwide which teach her methods today. In England, France, Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, Canada, and the United States. I am so thrilled to be with Margot Anand today and to introduce her as the head of the New Earth Academy for the Tantric Arts.
Yes, thank you. That was a great presentation. You didn't forget almost anything except my film, but that's okay.
Well, let's put that in there. What is the film, Margot?
You can find it on my website www.margotanand.com, and it's The Secret Keys to the Ultimate Love Life, and it's a trilogy video series, very well presented with 60 of my students, all being filmed, volunteering through my workshops and through different countries. And there's Deepak Chopra there and Tony Robbins there, and it's a very, very nice series.
Wow. Okay, that's definitely not something to miss. That's great. Okay, so I love how you define Tantra for Mr. and Mrs. Everybody as the art of choosing with awareness that which gives you joy and opens the door to your spirit. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that that alone tells us that Tantra must not be pigeonholed as mere physical sexuality, but it's more of a cosmic ecstasy that can be generated and used for joy and creativity and love of life. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, my thesis at the beginning of my exploration and research was that sexual energy, particularly orgasmic energy, is a motor. It's a motor of life. It's the most powerful motor that produces life. Without it, we wouldn't even be on the planet, nor with the plants, nor with the birds. So then that power can be harnessed. And it can be harnessed and channeled through our various energy centers, through our various organs. And as we do so, moving it through what I call a central channel, which corresponds to our endocrine system, medically speaking, and to our chakras, spiritually speaking, the energy of the orgasmic experience becomes more and more refined. And you ultimately get to the third eye and the crown, in which it becomes an ecstatic experience that transcends the boundaries of the body. It becomes a sort of a meditation or even a prayer, and you feel one with all that is. And so through the sexual experience, you can access the mystical, the spiritual dimension. And was my discovery early on. And so I made a whole system out of it, which is very powerful and which works extremely well for people who want to take the time to really study this, because you don't become a ski champion without practicing. You don't become a Rubinstein without practicing. You've got to practice, that's it.
Wow, that's everything. You've just basically brought all of the sexual energy into the power of the body, the spiritual aspect, everything. And isn't it, I mean, when we look at the world now and see how that sexual energy has been so corrupted and how things are so misguided, how can we guide them back to that right use of that power and its fullest potential? But it seems to me to be so complicated because you have people who are so miswired now and confused around sexuality. And there's, I suppose there's the religious overtones, there's the hedonistic overtones, there's the selfish aspect of it. There's just so many things in the mix now that's kind of complicated the purity of what it should be. How can we guide it back to that kind of state?
Well, I think that my training, which is called the Love and Ecstasy training, and which is also taught in America, became quite successful because I have very simple, very powerful, very down-to-earth tools to help people to understand and to value and to grow and expand their sexual experience. Of course, we need to take into consideration that we have been programmed by the religions to upgrade and believe in original sin, in a feeling of guilt and frustration around our sexual energy, because the church has always sought to control this energy, because the moment a person becomes an ecstatic person and has a deep experience of ecstasy, they also become a free thinker, and they realize that they can have a direct access to the divine without going through the intermediaries. And that is huge, because at that moment, they decide to craft their lives outside of the box and outside of what is imposed by the systems, where, nobody is there to tell you what to believe. You're the source. And if you experience yourself as source, then you become free. Mm-hmm. And nobody, the vested interests don't want us to become free. So we're basically needing to swim in an anti-ecstatic current in the current culture as it is. And we need to have the power and also the understanding of how to do that. And of course, the source is love. The moment we have love for ourselves, that we have appreciation that we are the source, that the source is within us, and of course, which helps that we have love around us in our family, in our partnerships, love for Mother Earth, love for nature, it becomes more easy. And then, specifically about the sexual part, the first step is to face what are the wounds in our sexuality. And the first step of our training focuses on healing sexual wounds. And we have very, very unique and powerful methods to release the negative memories out of the tissues in the body so that the people can be expressed and transformed, and they are usually transformed into a new capacity in the tissues themselves to feel good feelings, to feel good sensations, which they were not feeling before because they had become insensitive. So that's the number one. Then the number two is to learn how to become multi-orgasmic by allowing the electrical current that is released by the sexual energy, the sexual excitement, to stream through the body unimpeded. And this is a science in itself, which is actually not very difficult, and which we practice in partnership. And I have to explain here that in my trainings, nobody makes love in the group room. This is not an orgiastic indulgence. This is a science that people learn just like the way they would learn a yoga. In fact, it's a yoga of love. And so that's the second phase. And the third phase is to understand the sacred dimension of love. And so now we teach the people the ultimate and most precious secret of Tantra, which was taught in the ancient times after years and years and years of purifications and mantras and meditations, and which is basically how to recirculate or recycle or rechannel the energy between the two partners so that they get together into a point where they penetrate the infinite dimension beyond the boundaries of the body. And so then there is no more a me and a you and a I like and I don't like and I'm a man and I'm a woman and I have a body. There is a kind of a marriage between consciousness and energy, which is timeless. And that's what we teach. And people of all walks of life come to our trainings and come a very high rate of success.
It sounds like it ultimately just takes you to a place of total transcendence and unity with the divine.
Yes, but also going back to your roots and very much feeling and honoring your physical body and your groundedness. We don't believe in, the higher you fly, the deeper your roots. And if you don't have deep roots, you can't fly very high.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you walked us through these stages that are totally accessible for people. If they come to your work, they'll find these stages, and it will lead them straight through.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, a very quick example. If people ask me for a practical advice, I'll say, look, just for a moment, focus on what happens when you have an orgasm. Do you lie still and relax, breathing slowly through your nose? Well, the answer usually is at the first level, at the basic level, the answer is no. Okay? So you have what kind of breath? You have a very intensive breath that happens mostly through the mouth. Why? Because that puts you directly in touch with your feelings and it enhances your sensations. Mm-hmm. And it also helps you to get beyond control. Okay? So that's number one. Number two is when you breathe that way, your body wants to move because the breath expands your cells and the exhale lets them relax and, empty themselves. So there is a kind of a let go. I don't want to use the word contraction. It's a bad word, but you know what I mean. Opening and closing, expanding and relaxing and letting go. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is the voice. So usually when you have an orgasmic experience, ha, 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 and that's the language of sound, which gives a color to your energy and lets your partner know that something good is happening. And so these three things, what I call the three keys to orgasmic power, they can be applied in any situation. You can apply them when you dance, which is what we do in my workshops. You can start to watch how you prevent yourself from using your voice, how you prevent yourself from breathing deeply and openly, except when you go jogging or when you do something intense, and how when you move consciously in tune with your breath, your body expands and feels much better. It's a consciousness you bring to things. It's the marriage between consciousness and energy. And so these are very simple things which people can apply in all sorts of situations.
Yeah, no, I get it. And then you basically start walking through life with this heightened sense or more expanded sense of cosmic energy running through you. You live the ecstatic life.
Well, you value the ecstatic experience. You know that it's a key dimension that is especially important today because through ecstasy is an antidote. It's what actually keeps our immune system strong. Mm-hmm. And many people actually have ecstatic experiences, bliss experiences, and they don't even notice because they're too stressed out or they're in a hurry or they don't pay attention. Or a bliss experience in the beginning is a blink from God. And it's usually something very discreet. And, it's like someone paying attention to the bird that's sitting on the windowsill. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. Oh, look at the beautiful bird sitting on the windowsill. You just look at the bird, you feel that blissful moment of empty mind, the gap between the thoughts, the way Deepak calls it, and there you are. Now you have noticed this is a bliss moment. And when you start to notice this and value it, more of them come.
Yeah. Exactly. And I'm sure you've gotten this throughout the years you've been doing this, especially women looking at you and saying, gosh, I want what she's got. And to be after that radiance, that inner and outer radiance, because you've broken open the power within yourself. You've accessed your full power. And it seems like, women and men today are unsure of their power. They don't know how to access it. If they do tap into power, it seems to be a little bit maybe not altogether wholesome. And it seems to me that doing this work is really opening up your full power. That power that as you said earlier, that there are certain groups who would like us not to know about. What would you say to young women and men who are who hold this power but haven't opened it up yet, just men and women in general, about this power they innately possess, they were born with, they live to hold?
Well, the full power that we have is only complete when we realize that it has two aspects. The aspect of the receptive that focuses mostly on the art of being, and the aspect of the emissive that focuses mostly on the art of doing. So between being and doing, between what we call yin, the receptive, and yang, the emissive, then we have an aspect in ourselves with Jung called the anima and the animus, and it's also the capacity to be satisfied in being playful, in grokking what is, in relaxing in the moment, in not being goal-oriented. And the other aspect, which is the aspect of the leadership, of taking initiative, of holding a vision for people, for the family, for your kids, and guiding things. And so it's what I call also the inner man and the inner woman. So very often, I would say, if a man falls madly in love with a woman, it's because she is consciously or unconsciously the representative, the archetypal representation of his inner woman. And the same goes for the woman falling in love with a man. We have types that we fall in love with. Mm-hmm. Okay. If a woman has her inner man, her inner male aspect awake and alive, she knows much more easily how to have a good sense of self-esteem, because there is a grounded, strong part in her that trusts in her capacity to take charge and to protect herself. She doesn't depend on her man. She doesn't think that she's got a major flaw, she's missing something, and she needs her man to fulfill it for her. She can fulfill it for herself. However, the tendency when women do that is they forget the yin. They forget that there are moments where it's important to let go, that it's important to not always being the one leading and taking charge, that it's wonderful to give a man his natural role and to let him and give him the pleasure of taking charge. So it's actually ultimately about being comfortable in shifting roles. And that is the true power. You know, if you have a manager in a company that's always leading over, powering over everybody, thinking of power as being on top of the pyramid, or in his couple, powering over his partner, it doesn't work, you know. But if you power with, in a sharing way, in which sometimes when the other is yang, you take the yin part. And sometimes when it's your turn to take the yang or the leading part, then the other knows how to respect that and to be receptive, to be yin, to let you take the forefront. And it's this game between yin and yang that is the true power that the world needs more of, you know. And I would say that's how I would answer.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I realized that certain circumstances when I was very young turned me into a warrior, and I've only recently realized that I've been imbalanced in the warrior, and that the goddess needs to come forth and balance that out. And I think it feels so good to step into more goddess and allow, you know, the warrior to take a little bit of a step back, not entirely, but a little bit. So I totally get that. You know, I'd love to speak a little bit about the wounded, because sort of the sexual wounds. There's, you know, something like 1 out of 3 girls, and I'm sure there's a huge number of young men as well, that have basically, you know, before they're 12, have been exposed to some kind of abuse, sexual abuse. And given that so many young people are growing up with abuse histories, what are some of the things you recommend in your in that stage of releasing the wounds that you might be able to share with us?
Well, first of all, it's the attitude of your understanding of your consciousness. If you're a meditator, if you're someone who plunges deep within and witnesses is doing, what your mind is doing, and is able to access the space between the thoughts, then you know that even though there was a big trauma, there is always the possibility of healing the past, always. And so the first step is to believe that you have the power to transcend the trauma. You have the power to transform the trauma. And personally, I used to be a therapist, which meant that you have to go back to the root or the origin of the trauma to liberate the trauma, which I still do sometimes in my workshops. However, I'm a firm believer in the fact that once you cultivate ecstatic states, then the healing of the trauma is much more likely to happen almost by itself, or at least 50% or 60% of it. So that's number one. Number two is to notice that the reality or the definition that we have bought into through this traumatic memory is only one of many, and that we have to want and will and wish to transcend that. And we can transcend it through exactly the same keys that I mentioned earlier. Traumatized or not traumatized, it always comes down to the same thing. Release the contraction, breathe, give yourself the possibility and the power to express whatever the trauma brought you to. Talk to your perpetrator, the person who perpetrated the crime. Scold them, yell at them, get your sadness out and find your power through your anger, and your sensations and your pleasure will come back. Okay? It doesn't mean that because someone was traumatized, they should be punished and punished and punished for a whole lifetime. It means that they have all the more reasons to find the ways for them to cultivate their pleasure. And maybe their approach should be a lot more soft and gentle and take more time. But certainly one of the keys for me is to develop what I call your personal mantra. And your personal mantra, my personal mantra, when I worked on this, is to find all the negative beliefs that I thought prevented me from experiencing pleasure, and then to find, to write in the opposite page the positive equivalent. So, for instance, I can't feel pleasure. And then the other side would be, I am an orgasmic woman. Okay? So anyway, through trials and tribulations, my favorite sentence became, I am an orgasmic woman. So now, if I'm in a situation where I feel rather tired or rather negative, or I'm not so sure whether I'm really going to be ready to open up, and I've got better things to do, and I'm too busy, and tomorrow the publisher is calling, and why should I give time for my orgasmic self to have a chance to win or lose? And so if I start with my personal mantra, I am an orgasmic woman, and I believe that the orgasmic state is something which is going to bring joy and laughter and trust and lightness into my life, then I'm going to go with that. And the personal mantra is a reminder of my potential. And so that's what I would say to that question.
It's fantastic. Those are amazing tools. I mean, people could put that to work right now. Thank you for that. That's great. What do you think about, what's your take on the seminal fluid retention technique for men as taught by the Shaolin monks?
Well, I think that the Taoists had a point there by advising men to learn how to retain the energy of the orgasmic experience and channel it upwards. I think it's a very good thing for a man, and I should add a woman, okay? Because the key to channeling the orgasmic energy up through the chakras is exactly this. How can you cultivate the moment of pleasure to a moment of peaking and then relax in high states of arousal without letting go of your seed? This is the very key of the higher forms of Tantra. And the women who know about this are not the women who are demanding of their partners that they let go of their seed while they're making love, which is what a lot of women, because they know that if the man does that, then they have the feeling that he's giving over his power to them. But a tantric woman doesn't care about that. What she cares about is how she can flow, navigate, play, and love with her partner the longest possible time, because she's looking to pluck that moment of pleasure, that moment of bliss, breathe into it, move through it, and circulate it through her body, through her central channel, through what I call the inner flute in sky dancing Tantra. And so that is the more important consideration, much more than letting go of your seed, which anyway is not an advisable thing to do if you're tired, if you're stressed. if you're sick, if you have a cold, if you haven't fed yourself. There are moments where it's much more advisable and empowering to keep your seed, and you also are much more free when you're able to do that. And again, that goes for women and men, the ability to channel that energy upward.
How much of a challenge is it for a man to become adept at holding his seed and channeling it up? I think it's something that probably intimidates a lot of men, just the idea of not releasing when they reach that peak.
Well, it's very simple. The sexologists, every one of them, many of the Americans it's in every book possible that I've read, lots of them, say that if a man wants to master this, he has to self-pleasure to the point of no return, learn exactly how to stop before the point of no return. And then I add, from the Skydancing Tantra perspective, how to move your hand, caress and inhale and tighten your sexual muscles so you drink up this sensation up to your heart chakra. And you caress your heart channel. And then you deflate the tension of the excitement from the first chakra, and you move it to the heart and you spread it around. And then you exhale back down into the first, your root center, and then the blood flow and the energy comes back down there, and then you pleasure again, and again you stop before the point. The sexologist will tell you if a man knows how to do that 6 times in half an hour, then he's ready to master this technique. And he will have a happy woman. And as my Balinese friend says every time he walks in my house, happy wife, happy life.
It's true. And you'll also have a happy woman because she won't have to worry about birth control, because that's one of the, in terms of wellness, it's one of the most, the greatest underminers of women's health. So that's a biggie right there. Wow, thanks for that. All right. So, Margot, in previous interviews, you mentioned that one's youth is a time for having lots of lovers. And in today's world, there's so much porn and toxicity and confused morals. So would you give some guidelines to us for exploring and expressing and tapping into healthy ecstasy in a world whose tapestry is such, young people today on the world stage, it's just sexual exploration can be really dangerous compared to previous generations.
True. Well, I would say, first of all, that primordial is safe sex. So a young person would have to master a really true understanding of what safe sex is, and consider that a condom is like to be seen as a second skin, which means that you have to find the kinds of condom that you like. And personally, the ones I like, I call Avantis, and they're produced in France, and they're very thin, and they don't go away when the man is correct. So that's an important consideration. Protect yourself. And ask your doctors, or, find out about what are the sexual safety procedures today. And then the second is, don't make love with someone you don't know very much when you're intoxicated. That's an absolute no-no. Don't make love when you drank alcohol. Watch out about not going on dates with people you don't know very well. And if you go to parties, don't drink much, drink water, drink fruit juices, and go with someone else. So, these are basics, which it's unfortunate that you have to talk to people that way. But, I would say that I was lucky enough to grow in an environment where I was very protected, and where people were decent and civilized. So there was not the kind of thing that is now happening in America. And, but I mean, don't make love when you're intoxicated. That applies to someone who is still learning how to become mature. Because, in the Tantric tradition, the scriptures talked a lot about the use of soma, which today would be probably medicinal plants that are aphrodisiacs, which everybody's got their favorite. So I'm not going to go into that. But those can be very good if they're used consciously, okay, and if they're used in a spiritual ceremony. And the number one thing I would recommend is to look in my books and find the chapter on what I call the art of creating a sacred space, okay. And if you create a sacred space and you have a willing partner to create that with you, then you're home free, you know, and you would refuse to go into any intimate situations before having created a sacred space. And if your friends make fun of you because you approach all these things, I mean, you know, I have had all sorts of situations where I gave conferences to young people. And I was amazed, you know, what misunderstandings they had. So I was very glad that I could shake a few fleas there. And, you know, I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I was driving in California and a hitchhiker calls the car. I stop, I pick him up. He's about 17. Very nice guy, close the door, drive on. And he says, "You're Margot Anand, aren't you?" And I said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "Well, when I was 15, my dad picked me up at school and we drove on and you were talking on the tape in the car, talking about love and sex and so on. And I got very interested. And then my dad gave me the whole thing to listen to. I had a whole series of recordings to listen to, and I was still a virgin. I had never made love, but I got educated. And I was always grateful to you ever since, because the first time I made love, I really knew what to do." You see?
Wow. That's a great testimonial.
You know, it's good to educate your kids young.
Yeah, yeah. I've also always understood that, you know, when you make love, you merge with your lover's energy field. So in effect, you know, you take on all of his or her experiences into your energy field, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the magnificent, I suppose, as well. Do you believe this to be true? And if so, can it be detrimental to have multiple lovers in that way?
This is very, very personal. You know, I think multiple lovers has to be done these days very carefully, very consciously, and is for young people before they marry. When you marry, I think it's probably better, depending if you live in America, it's not so good to have you know, a hidden lover on the side. If you live in France, it's still very good and considered like not a big problem. We have very different ways of looking at things there in France and in America. And but I would say it depends. You know, there's no hard and fast rule. It depends on the person. It depends how they feel. Yeah, I'd say I never thought that you keep a person's karma for weeks and weeks. I didn't feel that, you know. It depends on how capable you are to close the door and, you know, say goodbye and cut the chakra cords, which is another whole topic.
And I just want to ask you, just for those who don't feel they resonate with having multiple lovers, do you want to speak to that a little bit too? That if they feel like, you know, kind of like on Pandora in the movie Avatar, where there was that imprint, when you made love, you were, you know, together for life, and that perspective. Would you like to say anything to that?
I would say that the way we're wired today in this world, with the short attention span that we have, this is a particular situation which is completely dependent on this lifetime, on past lifetimes, on what they're ready for. And as my California therapist used to say, it's not even in our hands. It's pre-written in the Akashic archives, and we have very little control over it. That's why you see some couples that are completely mixed and matched for life and very happy to be together. And you see other people that are constantly changing, because it depends. And you can't make a hard and a hard rule that it should be the same for everybody. But I think that cultivating intimacy and fidelity and respect and dignity and appreciation of each other is and should be first and foremost on everybody's book.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's lovely. Well said. Well, Margot, it has been an absolute pleasure, honor, delight to be with you and talk about this extraordinary subject, and I hope we get to do more so. Let's wrap it up. Is there any final words you want to say? Any final thoughts you want to share? You did such a great job already.
What I want to say is, don't put lovemaking last. Put it first. When you wake up in the morning, ask your door to bliss, what does she or he want today? Listen to them. They have their own thing to tell you. They have their own voice, their own consciousness. And remember, it's good for your health.
Wonderful. I feel like I want to go call my husband, tell him to come home from work right now. Margot, thank you so much.